A seven-time world champion trapped in a maze of technical errors, questionable decisions, and manipulated narratives? Lewis Hamilton's 2025 season with Ferrari hasn't simply gotten off to a rocky start, it's begun in free fall. And in this video, we're going to unravel every layer of a story that involves everything from a technical disqualification in China to an official warning in Japan that could put even more pressure on his adaptation to the SF25. Stay with me because we're not only going to explore what really happened at Suzuka, but also how the relationship between Hamilton and Ferrari is being misinterpreted. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, do you think Ferrari has lived up to the most anticipated signing in recent years? Lewis Hamilton arrived at Ferrari with a monumental expectation on his shoulders. It wasn't just the most high-profile signing in years, but also a promising one. The union of the most successful driver of the modern era with the most iconic team in the history of Formula One. A move that sparked excitement, headlines, and endless debate. However, the start of this new era has been anything but ideal. After just 2 races, the fairy tale has turned into a thriller, replete with technical errors, questionable decisions, and devastating consequences for the reputation of both the team and the driver. The turning point was the Chinese Grand Prix. There, Hamilton crossed the finish line in 6th place after an intelligent and calculated race. Leclerc, meanwhile, finished 5th. It seemed like a promising result for a team that had been struggling to find pace and consistency. The reason? Technical violations that, although distinct in nature, exposed a worrying vulnerability in the team's operation. Leclerc's car was found to be under the minimum weight requirement after replacing the front wing, a mere 1 kilogram, but still enough to invalidate his result. In Hamilton's case, the situation was even more delicate. The famous skid block, a key component for controlling the car's ground clearance, was showing excessive wear, rendering it outside the regulations. Up to this point, everything might seem like a simple case of isolated technical errors. But no, what's truly worrying are the reasons behind these errors. An internal investigation revealed that the problem with Hamilton's car wasn't the result of a simple calibration error. It was a direct consequence of a series of shortcomings accumulated since pre-season testing. In Bahrain, Ferrari was unable to complete a full race simulation with Hamilton's car due to a technical fault. This left them without the data needed to properly calibrate the SF25's ground clearance under real-life race conditions. Without that data, every setup change over the weekend in Shanghai, especially between the sprint race and the Grand Prix, was made in the dark, with no certainty of how it would affect the car's floor wear. The most serious thing is that these types of errors are uncommon in an elite team. We're talking about Ferrari, a team with decades of experience, abundant resources, and a history built on pinpoint precision. The fact that both cars were disqualified for basic errors speaks not only of poor execution but also of a disturbing lack of internal control. Team principal Fred Vasseur himself had no choice but to accept full responsibility before the stewards, admitting there were no mitigating factors or excuses. And all this is happening in a context where the margins for error are minimal. In a season where teams like McLaren and Red Bull are leaving no room for error, Ferrari has already thrown away 2 full weekends. The damage goes beyond lost points. It's about the credibility of a project that promised to revolutionize the championship, and which now, barely underway, is already in crisis mode. The storm didn't stop in China. Barely a week later, Formula One landed at Suzuka, one of the most iconic and demanding tracks on the calendar, where emotions, pressures, and narratives often reach boiling point. And what seemed like an opportunity for Ferrari and Hamilton to redeem their image after the technical debacle in Shanghai quickly turned into another awkward episode in this turbulent early stage of 2025. During Friday's second free practice session, Hamilton was called to testify before the stewards after a practice start in the pit lane that violated the race director's instructions. According to the regulations, drivers must follow a specific route within the pit lane for practice starts, respecting the flow of pit lane traffic and not interfering with other cars. However, amid widespread confusion among several teams, Hamilton crossed the pit lane into the designated exit area, overtaking several cars, which triggered the investigation. The verdict was a formal warning for both him and Ferrari. At first glance, it might seem like a minor penalty. But the significant factor here is not the penalty itself, but what it reveals. The pressure on the team and the driver is leading to small gaps in execution, hasty decisions, and avoidable errors. And beyond the regulatory aspect, this warning further fueled the fire of a media narrative that has been trying for weeks to portray Hamilton as a driver disconnected from the team or even as a disruptive factor within the Maranello garage. Nothing could be further from the truth, but that didn't stop the sensationalist headlines. And this is where one of the most controversial pieces of the entire weekend comes into play: the selective editing of Hamilton's radio messages by FOM. During race coverage in China, a fragment of the exchange between the British driver and his track engineer was broadcast, suggesting direct disobedience of a team order to let Leclerc pass. In the message broadcast to the public, Hamilton said, "I'll tell you when to change," a phrase that, out of context, was interpreted as an arrogant refusal to obey instructions. Social media immediately erupted with criticism. The media replayed the fragment ad nauseum, and a narrative of internal tension between the Ferrari drivers was woven. But what wasn't broadcast was the initial part of the message, in which Hamilton clearly states, "I think I'll let Charles pass because I'm struggling," a phrase that completely changes the meaning of the entire exchange. Far from resisting, Hamilton had proposed giving up the position because he recognized he lacked the pace. It was a show of maturity, team spirit, and intelligent reading of the race. But that part didn't appear in the broadcast. And that sparked a furious reaction from Fred Vasseur, who publicly accused FOM of manipulating the narrative through selectively editing radio messages to create artificial drama. This manipulation is no small feat in a hyper-connected Formula One, where public perception directly influences internal pressure within teams. A cut in audio can sow doubt, misunderstandings, and divisions. For a team like Ferrari, already under fire after the disqualifications in China, this kind of distortion represents a direct threat to its internal stability. And for Hamilton, a driver who has built his career on professionalism and consistency, being portrayed as a troublemaker is particularly unfair. As if that weren't enough, during that same weekend in Japan, other drivers like Lance Stroll also received warnings for similar infractions during practice starts. This reinforces the idea that instructions weren't communicated clearly enough, and that organizational chaos may have contributed to several teams' mistakes. But once again, it was Hamilton's name that dominated the headlines. Further evidence that, at this point, every step he takes is scrutinized and filtered through a pre-established narrative. Suzuka, therefore, wasn't just a technically complicated circuit. It was a media battlefield, a showcase of how pressure, errors, and media manipulation can converge to exacerbate an already complex situation. And the most worrying thing is that Hamilton's true performance and commitment to Ferrari are obscured by an environment that seems more interested in spectacle than truth. An environment in which a minor technical warning can turn into a scandal, and where a truncated sentence can cast doubt on even the most promising project. When Lewis Hamilton announced his move to Ferrari, he didn't just change teams, he changed ecosystems. He left behind a structure he had been an integral part of for over a decade, where every aspect of the car and the working environment had been developed with his driving style and technical preferences in mind. Joining Ferrari wasn't simply about changing cars. It was about reinventing himself in a team with a profoundly different culture, more rigid internal dynamics, even greater media pressure, and an inordinate amount of expectation placed on him from the very beginning. The first thing to understand is that, despite being one of the most successful drivers in history, Hamilton never underestimated the challenge. From day one, he made it clear that this would be an adaptation process, a long road, not instant success. He made it clear, he didn't expect to win the first race, let alone the championship in his first year. He knew that facing a completely new environment required time, patience, and a lot of work behind the scenes. However, that honesty has been distorted by those seeking to create narratives of conflict or frustration, when in reality what he has demonstrated is commitment and realism. One of the great challenges has been adapting to the SF25, a car that, although competitive in certain contexts, has a completely different character than the Mercedes that Hamilton drove for years. The SF25 demands a more aggressive type of driving in slow corners, presents instability under braking, and above all has a much narrower operating performance window. This requires absolute understanding between driver and engineers, and Hamilton, in that process, is still building that bridge of technical trust. Furthermore, Ferrari's internal language, work methodologies, and even simulation tools are different from what he was used to. And all of that adds up. But despite this learning process, Hamilton has provided very clear glimpses of what he can achieve when the car is in good condition. Just remember his performance in the sprint at the Chinese Grand Prix. There, he took pole position and subsequently won the short race, proving that when the setup is aligned and the car responds, his ability to execute remains intact. It's also important to highlight what he did in the final race of 2024 in Abu Dhabi, where he started from 16th place and managed to finish 4th, even beating his former teammate George Russell on the track. A washed-up driver, as some commentators have suggested, is not capable of producing those kinds of performances under pressure. And here comes another crucial point, the external narrative. Since joining Ferrari, Hamilton has been the subject of constant and often disproportionate analysis. Any gesture, any radio message, any result outside the podium becomes a weapon of immediate judgment. But within the team, at least for now, there is unity. Hamilton has been clear in rejecting rumors that he has lost faith in the project. On the contrary, he has emphasized that his confidence in Ferrari is total and that he is here to build something great, not to seek shortcuts or instant success. The relationship with Charles Leclerc has also come under scrutiny. Many expected an immediate rivalry, a clash of egos, a clash of interests. But what has been seen on and off the track is mutual respect. At Suzuka, when Hamilton decided to let Leclerc pass because he was struggling with the car's balance, it was a gesture of intelligence and camaraderie. And that, despite attempts by some media outlets to portray it as a disregard for team orders, reinforces the idea that Hamilton is committed to Ferrari, not just as a driver, but as part of a larger structure. Hamilton's adaptation process, therefore, is not simply a matter of results. It's a complete reconfiguration of his competitive environment. And while there have been many obstacles in these first races, disqualifications, warnings, media pressure, there have also been clear signs that the potential is there. What's lacking is time, stability, and the team finding a way to give Hamilton a car worthy of his talent. Because if one thing is clear, it's that Lewis hasn't lost his touch. What's missing is for Ferrari to finally find theirs. Throughout this analysis, we've broken down, point by point, how Lewis Hamilton's season opening with Ferrari has been marked by a series of events that go far beyond simple on-track results. We've seen how fundamental technical errors have called into question the Scuderia's preparation and operational capacity, how a minor warning at Suzuka has become fuel for media pressure on the British driver, and how, despite everything, Hamilton remains steadfast in his conviction that this project still has much to offer. Because what's happening at Ferrari isn't just a matter of poorly calibrated setups or poorly edited radio messages. It's a portrait of a team in the midst of transition, trying to rediscover its essence and rebuild a winning structure around a driver who doesn't need to prove anything, but who has decided to take on a completely new challenge. Hamilton didn't come to Maranello looking for a comfort zone. He came looking to make history. And history isn't written without struggle, without controversy, without moments when everything seems to crumble before rising again. Right now, the easiest thing to do would be to jump on the wave of snap judgment. To point the finger and say Ferrari has failed. That Hamilton made a mistake. That the magic has been lost. But to do that would be to ignore the context, the evolution, and the most important fact of all. The season has only just begun. And if Formula One has taught us anything, it's that everything can change in a matter of races. What seems like chaos today can become resilience tomorrow. What seems like an unforgivable mistake today can be the lesson that makes the difference in the second half of the championship tomorrow. So now I ask you, who've made it this far in the video, do you think Hamilton can turn this situation around and take Ferrari to the top? Or do you think this project is destined to collapse under the weight of expectations and media pressure? Leave me your opinion in the comments. The conversation is open and your perspective is part of this analysis. And if you found this content valuable, I invite you to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss our upcoming videos, where we'll closely follow the developments in this case, as well as other hotbeds of tension that are transforming the Formula One grid in 2025. Because this is just the beginning. And in our next video, we'll dive deep into the earthquake brewing at Red Bull, Liam Lawson's abrupt departure, Yuki Tsunoda's arrival, and Max Verstappen's growing discontent with the team's decisions. Don't miss it. Here we continue analyzing F1 without filters, without embellishments, and with all the context you need to understand what's really happening in the paddock. See you in the next analysis.